Hello, everyone, and welcome. We're going to give people just a few more minutes to log in now that we are officially live.
Yes.
So we will. Oops, I'm getting a phone call. I'm going to ignore that and turn on Do Not Disturb.
You're so popular, Alex.
Say what?
I said you're so popular. Look at you.
I know, right? It's not even anyone exciting. So, so how about we get started around 7:02? Does that work? So we'll give people 2 more minutes or so to log in. Does that work?
I love it. I love it.
Perfect.
I'm excited.
So welcome, everyone. If you're just tuning in, your audio is working. We're all just sitting here in silence. So we're just going to give people another 30 seconds or so, and then we'll kick it off with Delegate Sammi Brown and some amazing panelists. Your audio is working. We're all just sitting here.
I hear you. See, now I've got you.
Perfect. 30 seconds or so, and then we'll kick it off.
We're doing the thing.
It's hard to believe that it's almost November. We're almost there.
I'm blown away by it all the time. I'm also just blown away that 2 years ago, Alex, it was 2 years ago that
I know.
It was this scrappy little campaign that could.
And now we're doing it.
Now we're here. Being touted as the machine, the liberal elite.
I don't know about that. But well, it is 7:02, so let's go ahead and get started. I want to first begin by just saying hello, welcome everyone. We're very excited to have you tuning in here. I am Alex Orton. I live here in Jefferson County. I'm a high school teacher, and I've known Sammi Brown. I've been in the county for probably 5 years or so, and I fell in love with it. And one of the reasons is I love this community just because of the people, and you would be hard-pressed to find someone better than Delegate Sammi Brown. So I was super honored that she asked me to do this. And today we're going to be focusing on leading while young, which is something that Sammi Brown knows a thing or two about. And I'm super excited to welcome our 3 panelists. So I'm going to introduce you briefly, and then if you just want to log in and tell us, 1 or 2 things about yourselves. So let's start with Celine Wilson. Oh, you're on mute, Celine.
I'm sorry. Hi, everyone. I'm sorry if there's any feedback. But I'm Celine Wilson, and I'm a junior at Shepherd University. I got to know Sammi by helping her with her campaign this year, and I'm just really excited to be on this panel with all of you.
Awesome. Welcome, Celine. Let's go to Jeffrey.
Hi, guys. I'm Jeffrey. I'm 17 years old, go to Washington High School. I'll be a senior this year. And I'm also the NAACP Youth President.
Amazing. Welcome, Jeffrey. And last but certainly not least, Brogan.
Hi, everybody. I'm Brogan Dozier. I will also be a senior at Washington High School this year. I'm really excited to be here. I've known Sammi for a while, and she's always helped me out with any problem I've had. I was lucky enough to work with her on her campaign and knock on doors, so I'm just really excited to be here.
Awesome. Thank you, Brogan. So I'm going to turn it over to Sammi just to kind of tell us why we're here, who's here, and kind of what the purpose of the evening is.
Yeah. So what I have heard over and over again, particularly from young leaders and folks that are just really getting involved in movement spaces, is that I don't have representation that listens to me. I don't have representation that really speaks to any of the things I care about. How could they possibly know what is most important to me? And it really dawned on me, especially after a few of the protest actions that had emerged in the past year or two, that we have a new face of leadership. And it's not me. I'm not the organizer. I'm not the protest activist anymore. There's this whole other faction of energy, and you absolutely deserve your platform to be heard. The other part too, though, I often get, how are you doing this, Sammy? Or like, how do we get this done? How do we keep people energized? Who's going to listen to me at this point and stay active? And I think part of why I wanted to invite folks to this forum, and I hope that we have multiple ones with other emerging leaders, is to hear the questions that are top of mind for you, the things that you're most worried about. And then also, if there's questions of how we got this thing done, how you want to mobilize, how you want to organize. I've been doing it since I was 17, so we have a few years in the game now, and I'm happy to share those tips and tricks. But the idea as an organizer, as an efficient organizer, is you want to put yourself out of business. You want to make sure that there's other emerging leaders far after you. And I'm really proud to say that we've got 3 right here and tons more here in Jefferson County. So I can't wait to hear from you.
Amazing. And I also wanted to just point out that if you are tuning in, you can submit questions. We're going to be checking out the comment sections, and we'll bring them in as we see them. But if we don't get to them right away, we apologize, but we'll do our best. Yeah. So with all of that said, let's go ahead and kick it off with our first panelist question. Let's start with Celine.
All right, so my first question is geared towards Sammy's platform. And my question is, what drives your passion to have accessible healthcare for all West Virginians?
So on a political front, I can tell you that I had organized particularly around the safety net for years here in the state, whether it was temporary assistance for needy families, SNAP, Medicaid, Medicare, and these were all issues that really emerged for me with the common ground of I genuinely felt that the most needy of us did not have someone to speak on their behalf, certainly not in some of these more formal room spaces, and certainly not to a degree of saying this absolutely cannot be rescinded. The other part too is I did not grow up wealthy. I didn't grow up affluent at all. There was I can recall of a long period of time where, we absolutely struggled financially. As I got older, I saw a lot of disparity within socioeconomic status for different parts of the community. My grandmother, who was my very best friend, she passed away of pancreatic cancer, which was a complication of diabetes. And all of this could have been prevented with preemptive care, with robust care. So then when you come home and you see folks and they're struggling to pay bills, they're struggling to make ends meet, one of the first things that they neglect in order to afford their basic amenities is their own health care. And it's also subscribing to quality of life all the way around. Now we're having an emerging scenario where we're talking about pandemic, we're talking about folks being able to stay home and be with their families, and then educators are now having to go into the classroom, but we never fully funded PEIA. I think it really comes down to this for me. I feel like we have to constantly fight for folks when they cannot speak for themselves. I have to be that voice. And it emerges in a number of different ways that I advocate and legislate now. But healthcare was that first tenet that I can absolutely say, this is the pivot point for all folks to have any sort of quality of life. And if we're not preserving this in an equitable way, then we're going to continue to keep people in economic duress. It's unacceptable to have this predatory system that keeps folks poor when they're simply trying to take care of themselves.
Very well put. Couldn't agree more.
Thank you.
I love that you brought in the teacher aspect as well. I mean, obviously, what we've seen happening with our teachers has just been devastating. So, I mean, yeah, all of this is super, super connected. So, but I'm not going to ask any questions. Let's move on to Jeffrey.
Unmute Jeffrey. He's got to unmute.
Oh.
There we go, my love.
Let's see.
Unmute.
we want to move over to Brogan really quickly while Jeffrey figures that out. So let's go to you, Brogan. Let's ask your first question.
Hi, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Sammy, as a person of color, what are some challenges that you feel you faced in politics that your other counterparts haven't faced?
You just went right in, didn't you?
Not shy.
Right in there, yes. I'll tell you that there's been a number of dynamics that I've encountered that I'm not sure that my counterparts here in the Eastern Panhandle have really been able to empathize with, let alone the rest of the state. But we did have I use the term loosely, a colleague who was overtly discriminatory, and his rhetoric has to be one of the nastiest things that I've ever encountered, and it was probably what really brought out and put me front and center at the conversation of civil rights and human rights. I was very vocal on the House floor as a result, and it gave me a reputation for being in a positive light, fiery, and a negative light, a hothead. This is because I find it absolutely unacceptable to represent in any format that you feel that you can be discriminatory towards one segment of the community or another. So if you're calling the LGBTQIA community, what was it, a terrorist group, I think he said, to allude to, folks being like the Klan, like these are all incredibly disgusting comments. Then I remember a day where I walked into the chamber, and there was actually propaganda out in the rotunda that equated a friend of mine, who's now a congresswoman, to a terrorist. And it's not unlike some of the attacks that I've gotten here at home now that we've emerged in the political arena. The attacks are different when you're a person of color. They're also different when you're a woman. They're a little bit different when you're younger than your colleagues. I've gotten everything from you're stupid to you're unexperienced. I think someone made a sexual innuendo the other day about, my legs being open, and that's how I ascended to power. I've been told in a number of different formats, because I'm very vocal about civil rights and human rights, that it's all about all lives matter, that we don't have a plight as the Black community, Black, brown, however you may identify as far as your race or ethnicity. And then there's also been a very different type of pushback ever since so many of us have mobilized in the past year or two around that issue. You see it in a lot of different ways. It comes up as microaggression. It's like, this is not something you should be talking about. It even happens within our own party and on the left. It's like, that's not politically expedient for you to talk about. You really should not be doing that. But this is my lived experience. This is who I am. You look at me, and there's absolutely no way that you do not put together that I'm a woman of color. You, as far as you're concerned, I might be racially ambiguous. You can't decide what minority I am, but I am one. The harsh truth is, when you go for these things, that's the jugular. That's the first thing that they go to. They don't attack me on my policies. They really go for just a different brand of rhetoric, and certainly not anything that go to my qualifiers. It's just the reality of the game. And especially in this state right now, that's the rhetoric that's first and foremost. It's the thing that's up front and center. And I think they use it as a tactic to discourage us from leading altogether, to really put a not so subliminal message that you were never supposed to lead. You were never supposed to be a person of power or dictate the law. The law was supposed to dictate you. And it's going to be like that. And I feel very real need to say that to you as young leaders, to other folks that want to get into this space. It's not going to be easy. You're upsetting the apple cart. The status quo isn't the status quo anymore. And when you do that, there will always be a portion of the rhetoric that is going to be directed specifically to discourage you from keeping forward. And you just have to focus on what's most important there. It's not about your identifiers per se, but being inspired by those identifiers in order to affect change.
I love that. And I love that. I mean, yeah, the way that you fight against this is you have to call it out first, right? You have to address this thing that everyone is trying to just sweep, slide in there, and you need to call it out, which I think if there's one thing Sammi Brown is not afraid of doing, it is calling it out.
It's the truth.
So let's see. We have a question before we go over to Jeffrey from Aaron Lehman. West Virginia politics is a special beast. In the age of climate change, we don't have time to wait for West Virginia to catch up. Do you think our state's history of exploiting our lands and our people can be made up for in the eyes of young people? How do we fight our establishment in West Virginia while we are so rapidly losing our population? That is an excellent question.
There's a lot of components to that too. So first off, thank you, Aaron. These are really awesome. So first and foremost, yes. Actually, I think it is very much this age demographic that is going to be able to merge this idea of what it means to develop, what it means to have business, what it means to be profitable, and marry that to the idea of renewable energy and diversifying the energy sector. It's like we already have in our headspace that there's a way to be far more creative and expansive, and we're ready to get after it. I noticed in a number of conversations when it comes to fossil fuels and it comes to the energy sector that there are a number of individuals, particularly in our state, that hold tight to their trade. And I think that if there's anything that we can do, it's to be fully empathetic of the fact that there are trades and businesses that have upheld the state of West Virginia and its heritage for a very long time. And attacking the working man and attacking their heritage, attacking their trade isn't the way to go about pushing us forward towards diversifying the energy sector. What we can do, however, is protect those individuals, protect their pensions, go after their health care, make sure that their work sites are far more safe than they are now. As we start to diversify into some really exciting projects, that to me is what just transition actually looks like, making sure that our working families are taken care of, meanwhile moving us in a direction, especially in lands that have been stripped and quite frankly exploited by some ugly corporations, and repurposing in a way that we can look towards these new industries. I will say, as far as fighting the establishment, I call this the struggle to stay regularly. One of the biggest things that we have to do, and I really do look to new and emerging leaders to bring this rhetoric forward, but also to link arms with you to make this a reality, is that right now, in so many ways, we're telling you through the law that you don't belong here. And I've taken some stances that were very controversial simply because I will not stand for putting our own people down through the law. I remember that when we were going after non-discrimination here locally, and then attempting to pass this, something similar through ENDA, through the state legislature, the pushback that we got was mind-boggling to me. To continue to say it's unnecessary when we see action and hate rhetoric and the language constantly thrown around amongst our communities, and you're telling me that it's not necessary to have this in place. It's also a vote to tell people implicitly, if you're different than I am, if you identify differently than I do, or what I feel the norm should be, you don't belong in the state of West Virginia. And then we're exporting our greatest resource, which is our people and our talent. So that's the first step, is that we have to break down those norms and break down those barriers and say that that's unacceptable. I don't care that it feels difficult or harmful or not. It won't gain me votes. That's not what this is about. It's about doing the right thing. And I can't continue to watch as folks sit idly by and let this be passable. It's also why I really, when I get a bill, I really dig into it, because of the way that some of the implicit bias sneaks its way into the language. So I don't catch it all, but I definitely dig in there for that purpose. After that, trying to attract folks back to our communities and to the state of West Virginia. Often what I hear, and I'm definitely looking forward to hearing this feedback from our panelists, is that my opportunities aren't here. There's nothing that can keep me here, and I can't have a family here. There's nothing to keep me afloat. I paid all this money for a college degree that I can't even use. And at this point, we have to take that into deep consideration and how we're going to diversify and have jobs of the 21st century. I also look to public employees and educators as being another litmus for that, because you cross the border 30 minutes away from us here in the Eastern Panhandle, and your pay is potentially doubled. So what are we doing to keep our talent, to attract our talent, to say that this beautiful place that we call home, and it is beautiful, can also obtain and maintain your quality of life through your trade and the things that you care most about?
Absolutely. Let's go back to Jeffrey. Jeffrey, is your microphone? There we go. We're good.
Let's go, Jeffrey.
So like in the school system, me being a senior, there wasn't really much information about voting. Who should we vote for? Why should we vote for these people? So what can we do to really get the information out there for the young generation that are in high school that are getting ready to vote? For you and for other delegates.
I think one of the biggest questions that I want to ask you, Jeffrey, is when seniors and juniors are getting of age to be able to vote, what is it that attracts you to the political sphere to begin with? Or what makes you not want to be involved? What do your friends say that makes them not want to be involved in politics?
Yeah, I think it's more of how you grow up. I've always grew up to vote. You need to vote. Your ancestors fought for the right to vote. So you really need to pay attention and learn your history. Learn who's going to be running. What do they stand for? Why do they stand for these policies and other things? So for my generation, my friends, we each grow up differently. So I guess school doesn't really talk about it as much as I think that it should be talked about, just because we are the new generation. We will be in these offices one day. So
I love that. I'll tell you, one of the biggest detractors that I hear about as far as young people wanting to get involved in movement spaces and in politics, period, is that the climate is so divisive. Does that feel right to you? Just give me a thumbs up. Yeah. So incredibly divisive. It feels polarizing. You've got enough on your plate right now. Why would you want to get involved in this? The other part too is the school system hears this. The school system knows that this becomes polarizing and this becomes very divisive, and they don't necessarily want to have to navigate that in the school space. Do I agree with that? No. Because I do believe that we are at a time, at an impasse, that it is critical that we are fully educated on what is going on in our government and with your representation. So often it's very easy to just grandfather folks in to these positions, and they have absolutely no platform that speaks to what's most important to you and what you care about, which also means you're voting against your interests. The other thing that I could absolutely say is that what we can do in a very nonpartisan way is to educate one another on the process and on the system. Because right now, what I often see is a lot of divisiveness, a lot of hateful rhetoric, and they're not even understanding how the votes fall together in order to create an end result. Or we're not understanding what each role in government actually plays. And we can educate one another on that. I do feel that that is where we should be going as far as implementing new portions of an educational curriculum, not necessarily where what I've seen offered so far, which is attempting to bring in some other components that really could potentially be divisive or a little disengaging for folks that don't necessarily identify with one religion or another, or one faith or ethnicity, et cetera, et cetera. We're not here to disenfranchise. We're here to create an inclusive space. And one of the ways we absolutely can do that is to let folks know that there is a process, a democratic process, educate them on how to be involved in that process and vote properly, and then how to follow your votes through your state legislature, which I may be biased, but I personally feel that that is where the closest we can feel the pulse of our community and implement law on a state level.
As a teacher, if I could just interject a little bit as well. One of my favorite things is when students take projects on and run with them. So I would very much encourage you, Jeffrey, Brogan, Celine at Shepherd as well. There's nothing stopping you from running everyone get on to the Secretary of State's website and sign up to vote, right? Like, you can do that in your government classes, which you take in 12th grade. And your teacher would love that. That directly ties into what you were talking about. What better lesson than we're learning about, okay, the 3 branches of government? No, let's make this actionable, right? And that's what makes school exciting. And your teachers are going to love that, right? Because you are taking what they're teaching you and running with it. So I would welcome that in my classroom, and I can't think of any other teacher that is teaching government that would shy away from that. Because you're right, it does not have to be partisan, right? Just getting involved in that process is what we're trying to do, right?
Exactly. And I actually think it's very healthy to engage in civil discourse, I'll call it. Not everyone's going to agree with you. And guys, I can tell you this right now, there is going to come a point in time where you may not agree with me, okay? And in general, that's what makes us so robust in this representation, if we're willing to listen to one another. I think for particularly for your question, Jeffrey, a way that you can engage in the way that you can really change the face of the dynamics within your classroom and within your friends at school is to engage in a way that allows them to be interested in registering to vote, that gets them to want to follow the legislature. Yes, we do live stream. You may watch it, but also making sure that you're having those conversations about things that might be a little controversial, might be a little sticky, but also listening as much as you speak.
Absolutely. You are the next generation of leaders, so get engaged. We want it. So let's go back to, oh, here we go. Let's take a question from a comment. As we know, there is a clear and apparent danger with the occupant of the White House, but as we know, many of the issues that we are seeing today is not new. Racism in all its forms, including inequality becoming as dichotomous as ever, the poor continue to be looted, our planet is literally decimating, voting rights are continuously being suppressed, etc. How do we continue this conversation effectively if and when Trump is defeated, people will think the job is done?
The job's not done. No, not at all. Yeah, great question, Addie. The conversation, well, let me just be very direct about this. It didn't matter what party was in power. These issues still occurred. Okay. And I want to be very direct about that. And that's not throwing my own party under the bus. That's not villainizing the opposition. It's a known fact that marginalized communities have not necessarily gotten the representation that they've deserved all along. That's why we've had to have these moments, these high impactful moments where we emerge, where we protest, where we have to demand that change. And just because we change representation in the White House, if and when that does occur, it's still up to the people of the United States to hold that representation accountable. Just like I'm having this conversation with you today because as your representative, I absolutely am accountable to you. And so we should have these conversations. There also needs to be a path forward. And I really do challenge us as consumers of policy and the democratic process to really be able to delve into the fact of where's the plan? Show me the receipts at this point. It's all well and good to say all the things that you need to hear, and they do it. Whether it's 2 years, 4 years, 6 years, they know the things to say to you. There's pollsters to tell them what they need to hear. But the reality is, if there's no plan, then it's just performative. We have to hold people accountable, or it will always continue to be performative allyship. So the job is never done. There's always going to be more of the people than there is of representation. And it is absolutely our charge and our power to be heard in that way.
Perfect. Well, we are at our halfway point, and so I want to make sure that we can hear from a bunch of hear from some more of our panelists here. So let's go back to Celine really quickly. Do you want to ask your next question, Celine?
Sure. So you kind of touched base on this already, Sammy, but a question that I have is, what reason would you give young people like Brogan, Jeffrey, and I, our demographic, to take an interest in our community?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. There's so much, though. There's so much. If it's not for you, it's not going to happen. And that's just that's the real truth. It's the charge that I'm going to give you, is that in a very real way, the things that you see and want to impact and want to make a difference, if it is not your vision put into place, it cannot and will not happen, because it didn't have your influence, it didn't have your input. And know that you very much have a place in all of this to make an impact, because there's only one you to begin with. Your lived experience is sufficient enough to be an incredible leader. And I say that mostly because if it weren't for the things that you've been through, that you've seen, that you've experienced, there wouldn't be the same type of drive to be involved in the spaces that I know the three of you are. Alex and I both were in Young Democrats of America. We've gotten involved in political spaces, and it's directly because we felt that our principles and values were not were not being represented. It wasn't even close. We weren't even making a path forward to those ultimate goals. We weren't being seen by our government, and the laws reflected that, which is why we decided that we were going to show up and be visible. And the same thing is very much the truth for the three of you. If you do not show up, if you're not visible, then the law and your representation will not look or sound like you. So it's your time.
Absolutely, absolutely. Let's go back to Brogan.
Yeah.
Right. Now this next question, please don't limit yourself to just what you've done as our delegate, but what do you feel has been your biggest accomplishment?
Oh my gosh, really? Biggest accomplishment. Long before I became a delegate, I was an organizer throughout the state of West Virginia, and then ultimately throughout the country. I think some of my favorite moments, I don't know if they're my biggest accomplishments, but some of my favorite moments have been large scale direct action. I can cite back to when we were in the right to work fight, and we had thousands of union brothers and sisters that we had mobilized on Capitol steps that day, thousands. And it may have been the pivot point for me as an organizer, where I could stand back and see that crowd and think to myself, my goodness, this is what I was meant to do. We weren't necessarily successful in that fight in the long run, but to see folks energized and inspired and willing to mobilize and see that it didn't matter what affiliate you were a part of, what your trade was, or even your state at that point. There were brothers and sisters from neighboring states that came in just to lock arms with their in solidarity with their brothers and sisters. It was an amazing moment, which could only be trumped by seeing 55 counties mobilize around their educators. I knew that I owed it to the folks that had taught me and didn't give up on me to be their most vocal advocate once I did get in the legislature. It was a really proud moment for me to see that once we were in, and then Omnibus came back on the docket, when our governor decided he wanted to sign in Jefferson County, that we mobilized in rapid action and made sure that didn't happen. So our educators very much stood up and fought back. And it was an incredibly proud moment for me to be the one to sound the alarm. They're just amazing. And I'm forever floored by how big hearts that we have in this community. I think as a legislature, or as a representative and in the legislature, some of my more proud moments really came to affecting legislation around sexual assault survivors and domestic violence. It meant a lot to me to see that the law was changed in a trajectory that actually represented those individuals, that victims or survivors were finally represented, that there was common sense outlines for how an individual that had been harmed could seek justice. And most recently, and maybe this is one of my bigger accomplishments, but most recently I received a letter from a gentleman named William, and he is serving a life plus sentence. And he wrote me specifically to not only thank me, but to ask that I reintroduce a bill that I had drafted this past legislative session, and it was called Second Look Sentencing. And criminal justice reform has absolutely been one of my favorite wheelhouses to be a part of. I'm not sure that folks really understand how much it impacts our community in particular, and in the 65th district and across the state. But there are a lot of folks that are really looking for that second chance, that just want so badly to be able to try again. and we don't know their circumstances. We don't know what got them to that place, and it's not really for me to judge. But to be able to put forth legislation that made that kind of an impact, that someone wanted to write and say that it moved us, that we're following this, that this gave us hope. You can't beat that. You can't.
Powerful. Let's move back to Jeffrey. Jeffrey, do you want to ask another question?
I'm grabbing water. Sorry.
That's allowed.
So our nation is asking for justice. What will you do that will see equality for all?
Jeffrey, right off the bat, I can tell you that a lot of my priorities as far as legislation are really centered on the injustices that I've seen. It is a common theme for the things that I introduce. Unfortunately, it has kind of put me in the crosshairs of a lot of interesting rhetoric, but it's absolutely, in my mind, the right thing to do to, again, really push forward in that fight for equity and inclusion. There's a number of things that I have co-sponsored that I plan to continue to reintroduce and then also seek out if reelected in November. Not the least of which really comes down to reforming laws that reek, in my mind, of implicit bias. I think there's a lot of legislation, a lot of laws out there right now that target minorities and marginalized communities, the poor. And one of the most effective things that I can do for you as a representative is to get that out. It's antiquated, it doesn't belong. And we as a state very much need to sound the alarm and say that we won't tolerate that type of divisiveness. What I'll also say is that we will reintroduce, and because I absolutely believe in non-discrimination, it's something that we fought for here locally and won, might I add. But then also, we absolutely should have this legislation on a statewide level. I do believe that there's more to be done as far as equity and inclusion on our campuses. I am going forward with affirmative consent and making sure that we are not demeaning and diminishing assault survivors, particularly in campus spaces. I'll also be going after a number of pieces of legislation that have to do with the instances that we've seen in the past year, the very reason that many of us are mobilizing in rapid action right now. We know that there is a very real need for police reform. We know that there is a very real need to re-examine what it looks like to enforce the law in the state of West Virginia and across this country. We know that incarceration is oppressive, and we need to look for ways to end mass incarceration and end privileged immunity within the ranks. So this is all coming down to how we're going to be effective and efficient in holding folks accountable. And in many ways, I've gotten pushback for that. But I'll tell you this, if you are a person that is leading with the best of intentions, if you too are seeking justice, if you too are putting people first and they are your priority, that their safety and well-being is your priority too, then you and I will have no problems.
Awesome. Celine, do you want to answer, or you can answer a question too, but do you want to ask your next question? No.
I'll ask a question. So what are your views on the environmental issues in West Virginia? And are your views challenging to get across since we live in a pro-coal mining state?
One more time, Link. She broke up a little bit on my end. I apologize for that.
So the question was, what are your views on the environmental issues in West Virginia? And are your views challenging to get across since we live in a pro-coal mining state?
That's a tough one, but I'm sure Sammi can handle it.
Yeah, it's been it's been a tough negotiation for the past 2 years. And I'll tell you, I'm endorsed by coal miners. I'm endorsed by brothers and sisters of the UMWA. And and it is not, I think what that should very much say to you is that me having this stance of environmental justice is not juxtaposed to the men and women that are working in our coal mines right now. We're not at odds. And the reason that we're not at odds is very much this is about equitable treatment of people in the state of West Virginia. Now, as far as my environmental stances, I share an office and many pieces of legislation with someone that I call the quiet warrior, and his name is Evan Hansen. And Delegate Evan Hansen and I, we make a hell of a team. He makes me brave, I'll tell you, but he's also brilliant. And when we have sought after a number of pieces of legislation, not the least of which was solar and just transition, he's someone that not only did I learn from, but I felt like I needed to up my game to make sure that I was as equally ferocious for these bills and these concepts as I would be for anything else. And I do have a partner in crime when it comes to these pieces of legislation, so I'm not alone. But one of our challenges as freshmen has been speaking the language of the opposition. How do we get buy-in from the other side of the aisle? One of the breakthroughs, though, is that this year we did have, I believe it was Commerce. It may have been Commerce that came to visit us in Judiciary to speak to the necessity of solar in development. And they received a lot of pushback until I made my testimony in Judiciary Committee. And it was very much around that if we are going to look to develop in a mindful way, in an equitable way, one that's socially responsible, it is absolutely time that we adopt this as part of our energy sector. That solar is very much an integral part of what commerce and development can and could be if done the right way. And so I know that there's going to be an uphill battle. I know that there's going to be a very real challenge, but this is when, if I could invoke the late great John Lewis, this is when you speak up when you see something wrong, no matter the odds.
Good trouble.
Good trouble every time. But that's where we are right now. So I'll continue to fight for these. I will continue to push forward with not just diversifying energy, but also clean water, clean air. Obviously, we were in the epicenter of quite the environmental justice controversy, and we still are, but we're making movement in there. The fact that there's headlines on the local paper saying that we're changing our model for how we're going to produce this product here in Jefferson County lets me know that we're absolutely moving the needle, that it's getting very loud and clear what folks want in this community and beyond in order to have true quality of life and also see the growth that they're looking for in the state of West Virginia. It'll be tough. It's always going to be tough, but
people like these panelists here, like we want them.
Exactly. Keep going after it. Keep after it.
Let's see, Brogan, do you have a question?
Mm-hmm.
There we go.
Trying to unmute.
No worries.
In the next 5 years, what are some of the problems that you want to tackle and things you want to accomplish?
5 years, huh? Do we mean personally or legislatively? How do you want me to get after that one, Brogan?
I'm sorry, what would you say?
Do you mean as far as legislation? Do you mean my goals personally?
Just the first couple of things that come to your mind, the things that you really think need to be talked about.
Sure. I'll say I'll start with a policy perspective and then I'll move past that.
Hey, Brogan, can you mute your mic again? I was confused. Perfect. Thank you.
So with policy, I definitely have a few that are my favorites that I want to get after, and I'm hoping that they'll be able to contribute to a more robust landscape, not the least of which was called the Green Light Act, which is the decriminalization of cannabis. I'm very proud of that legislation because it touches on a number of points. It's a very intersectional bill that has components of criminal justice reform, racial justice, and then also, front and center, cannabis. So I do think that it's time that we really move forward in that industry, that it can be something that contributes to what we need as far as revenue to truly fund wraparound services, mental health services, and attack the opioid epidemic. There's so much that can be done there. And I do think that it will take that kind of time to push us forward in that mentality to get this done. Aside from that, I also believe that there will become a time where we really reform what was called SB1, and they touted it as debt-free college. It's not quite debt-free college. I'd like to see a place and a time where we are not putting the people of West Virginia in deep debt or aggravating the disparity for bettering themselves. So it is a piece of legislation that I would like to see in a more robust format. And then, of course, I'm going after all measures as far as criminal justice reform and true equity within our communities. So that's from a legislative perspective. On a personal level, I am in the middle of my direct commission for the Air National Guard. So I hope that in that time, I will have not only been Lieutenant Sammi Brown, but we'll have moved through the ranks, and I'll be able to serve my state and my country in a different capacity, a larger capacity, and it means a lot to me. Coming from having been raised by a man who was in the Air Force, and I wish he were here so he could see it. I wish my grandpa were here so he could see this day, but I think he'll be very, very proud. Another component that I'd like to do for myself is I think that all of this has really brought to light what it means to build power for the average person or for young people in general, what it means to navigate spaces of leadership when you don't come from means, or you weren't from a legacy, or you weren't affluent to begin with. This is important because it may inspire my next big project. And what I would love to do with that is to build the models so that we are independent and not dependent on traditional structures. And what I mean by that is the things that you need to elevate yourself as far as leadership are typically media, money, people. And I feel like I want to teach folks and build the structures so that you have a platform. You can raise money through small dollar contributions and be really viable and formidable in this space. And then learn truly how to be a mindful organizer and mobilize people around you and your causes. And if I get to be the person that teaches folks in the state to do that, I'd love to do it.
Great. Jeffrey, do you want to ask another question?
So President Biden selected Senator Kamala Harris as vice president. What is your professional advice for West Virginia voters on their position of the historical movement in the 2020 election?
One more time, Jeffrey, because the beginning broke up a little.
Okay, so President Biden selected Senator Kamala Harris as vice president. What is your professional advice on West Virginia voters' position on this historical event of the 2020 election?
My professional advice.
Or
That's a tough one. I don't think it's going to be well received in the state of West Virginia. And it really breaks my heart to say. I mean that. I don't think that that it's necessarily going to drive folks up and down the ballot, which is also why I'm going to tell you that it's not the top of the ticket that we should be focusing on as West Virginians. As West Virginians, we really should be focused on what is going to directly impact the climate of our respective communities, who's going to be there to see, touch, and feel the dynamics on a regular basis. There's a very stark divide right now politically, and I am not of the belief that West Virginia is conservative, but West Virginia is populist, and with that, there is a harsh misunderstanding from the top down and some of the larger entities on what it means to speak to the needs of West Virginians as a whole. And in a lot of ways, they've clumped in the things that you care about with what they think you care about, and have not really taken into consideration that we are not a monolith of ideology. What I mean by that is we don't all think the same way. That said, there's an immense amount of pride in the state, and we love and care for our own. We will fight for one another harder than I've ever seen anywhere. But that has nothing to do with the top of the ticket.
Absolutely. So we have about 4 minutes left. So what I wanted to do is give our panelists maybe one more. There's the last thing that's burning, that you want to ask Delegate Brown, and then we can wrap up. So let's go in the same order. Let's start with Celine, just a real quick question, and Sammy, just a quick response.
Ooh, okay. Rapid fire.
All right. So last question. I'm going to kind of go back to the community factor, but so for voting right now, with the whole debate of in-person versus mail-in voting, what would you say is something for everyone to keep in mind in our community?
Exercising your right to vote is a non-negotiable, particularly this year. Vote by mail is safe. I think that one of the things that we can do as local organizers is to educate folks on the true parameters around vote by mail and what it means to exercise your right to vote in a format that maybe they weren't familiar with prior. That said, if you're going to vote at the voting polls, know where your polling place is. Mask up and be prepared to get this thing done this year, because we're best Virginia.
Here we go. Brogan, one last question.
What is the best advice you could give a young woman hoping to get into politics?
Advice for young women getting into politics. Yes. Know your squad and keep them close, keep them tight. The people that love you, support you, and clap for you, those are your people. You keep them and keep that circle very tight. Also, you're going to be under a microscope that your colleagues are not. Know that going into it. Have tough gator skin. And always stay focused on why you decided to do this to begin with. It wasn't about you. You wanted to serve others. And if you focus on that, you're going to be just fine. The last thing I'll say is stay true to your whole self. And it's something I'm learning every day. You're allowed to be a multi-dimensional person. You do not have to sound like one thing or the other, or what they think you should be as a leader. You are in this space. You are leading. Therefore, you, as you are a leader. Next question.
I love that. That also kind of answered Aaron's question a little bit quickly, just kind of politics are everywhere. And when it's also your work, you can't put it down when you get home, right? So how do you take care of yourself?
So I've actually made it a little bit of a mandate that I have certain things in my life that I have every day. So first thing in the morning is my gym time. It's blocked out. Granted it's at 6 o'clock in the morning, so typically no one's calling me then, but that's part of one of the things that I need. And I learned that the hard way, that I need a physical outlet. I need that type of exchange in order to keep myself together. The other two components that I've learned that I've needed is one that's creative and one that's faith-based. The creative component is because all throughout my life I've engaged in some sort of artwork, or I've produced, or I made music. I played multiple instruments throughout school. And then during college, I produced radio. And to not have that creative outlet, I felt it. It made me feel like I was missing out on a whole other part of my life. The last component is I was raised by a man of faith. He was the deacon of his church. So many of the things that he taught me were rooted in scripture. And to have that grounding, I thought I needed to walk away from it for a various number of reasons, mostly because I wasn't sure that as I am, fit in the church. But as it turns out, my relationship and my faith journey is something that it keeps me flanked, it keeps me grounded. And I will say that, again, adding to that advice, having those pieces and knowing that you're a multidimensional person and preserving that also keeps you at a strong core and protects you. It insulates you from being corrupted. You don't hinge your entire identity on that title or that power. Your identity is so much more than that, and it gives you perspective. So it's one of the main reasons I do that.
So I'm going to let Jeffrey ask his last question, but also if there's any other questions in the audience live, this is your last chance to get those in the comments. And so while y'all are typing your comments in, let's hear from Jeffrey.
So with the Black Lives Matter movement, what is your opinion on it and how it is looked at in America?
So I've been a vocal proponent of the Black Lives Matter movement. And in particular, I took a stance of how to be a proper ally. One of the biggest questions that I got from folks were, well, what am I supposed to do in this moment? What does it mean? Well, okay, I know that this isn't my emotional labor, but I'm going to offer. I'm going to offer what it means to practice your anti-racism education, to really delve into what your wokeness may be, and also what it means to be a true ally for those of us that experience this on a regular basis, that are mobilizing, that are experiencing an immense amount of pain and still showing up every day. And so that is the space that I started to genuinely occupy. Now that shows up in a couple of different ways on my feed, right? So sometimes you get the mood posts where it's like, man, I'm so fatigued in this activist space. And then there's other
real.
Yeah, where let me educate you on these terms within our space right now. Do you know what intersectionality is? Do you know what performative allyship is? Do you know what it means to really understand the dynamic that we're working through right now, and what you can actually do to make a difference instead of contributing to the problematic rhetoric? And I find myself holding folks accountable on all sides on this, including ourselves, knowing that I too have my own work to do, right? Like I needed to check myself and allow people to come in and be a part of this movement with us and be allies. I want you here. But I had to check my own anger and pain to give you enough time to get here, right? And so that's what I think that we can do when we're at the forefront of this as young leaders of color. having these conversations and also having to converse with our elders that saw something very similar and also very different than what we're experiencing right now. I hope that very directly let you know that I'm that I believe in the movement, and I know that I'm so frustrated by the way that it's described regularly, and it's false. I know that the movement for Black Lives was started by mourning mothers that lost their sons. My goodness. But know that that's what we're fighting. That's part of the opposition. And it's a very multifaceted approach right now.
So let's just, this question from Georgia will be our last one. What are some ways that you can suggest to become more politically active on a local and or national scale when you are not old enough to vote and not lose confidence when you are passionate in politics and sometimes get judged by your peers?
Oh, goodness. I felt every bit of it. Oh, Alex, do you want to tell them? Okay, share your experiences first. That way I can drink of water.
Woo, all right. So let me say, I did not grow up here in West Virginia. I grew up in the great state of Utah. But it also is, you know, there are some similarities there. So some of my my political ideas maybe were not what my peers were thinking. But what I think I learned from that, right, is I was always very politically minded, and I wanted to get involved, and I wanted to understand how laws impacted people and how you could change them, right? And so I just started showing up and going to meetings, right? Like, or talking to people. I sent letters to, I mean, the president at the time was George Bush when I was in high school, right? So I sent letters to the White House asking questions, and he wrote back, right? So there is no barrier too out of reach, right? Like, you can break them down, and you can, I mean, that's the job of these officials, right? Is to hear from their constituents and, you know, don't let, but also there's something about, you know, engaging with your own peers, and even if you don't agree with each other, right? Just opening up that dialogue and having those productive conversations is a skill that's going to carry you very far. Because if you can have tough conversations, maybe not agree on everything, but walk away still friends and actually even closer, right? That's a skill that I think sometimes we're losing a little bit. And so I would just encourage you to have those tough conversations, and to just get on that journey. I don't know. I spoke a little bit longer. My bad.
No, I love that you did. I think back to my very first action that I was a part of. I was 8. So it was a protest for Title IX at the time, and we were on the Washington Mall. So, and obviously I was not old enough to vote, but I had this space that I got to occupy with my protest sign and my puffy jacket, and I was right there on the fence to be vocal and to be seen. And I think that's probably how I caught the bug. I probably should have known that I'd get in politics years later, but I definitely didn't see it coming. What that is to say, though, is for my brothers and sisters that are not quite old enough to vote, your presence is very much needed and felt. And when you show up and you're also sharing your perspective, I personally deeply value it, because the candid way that you articulate the things that you're passionate about blows my mind to this day, and it gives me a huge perspective, genuinely. And that's a challenge to share. Now, you are going to get some criticism, and so I know that that's tough, and sometimes it can break your heart. And there are some folks that aren't necessarily as open-minded and open-hearted as you would like them to be. But again, it's the crocodile skin. It's how you toughen up a little bit, and still emerge and speak to the things that make your heart skip a beat. I would say that, and I would say this at any age, there are many ways to be an ally. There's many ways to be an activist. It doesn't all look the same. And so there's this misconception that you have to, you know, you have to be an extrovert. You have to go to these marches. you know, I am a protest activist. I absolutely have engaged in civil disobedience, but that does not mean that you have to, and it doesn't make you any less passionate or any less of an ally. So whatever your talents are, and bring them to the movement space. I call it craftivism. If you're an artist, and you make these beautiful protest signs, and you make these beautiful pieces of work, it's a story.
I would say, I mean, that way, I mean, I am new to the showing up and protesting, right? I was always a very good writer, and so I was really great at writing people letters or trying, using that skill set to help, maybe people that are taking the front of the stage. I was really good at supporting, right?
Yeah.
So that is a totally new, right? And then once you get involved, you get more comfortable,
Write it. Yeah, definitely. Blog is huge. You have such an incredible platform, and it's multidimensional with social media. Use every bit of it, just to speak your truth and to
tell your story, right?
Mm-hmm. It's so visually impactful, and there's a lot of different ways to get involved within your comfort zone. And I would very much encourage you to find those outlets and find those creative spaces to show up and show out and speak to the things that make your heart skip a beat, for sure.
Well, we went over. This conversation was just too good.
Yeah.
That's all right. Well, thank you, everyone, particularly our 3 young leaders. We cannot wait to see what you do. Can't wait to see you run for office someday.
Yes.
And let me know. I am there to knock doors when we can, and be there to help you out. So, and I think our delegate, Sammi Brown, feels the same way.
Thank you. Yeah.
I'll let you close us out, Sammi, and then.
I love it. I'm so grateful that you guys joined us today. I loved the comments, and I know that folks had submitted questions prior. I refused to look at them in order to make sure that we were just having a very candid and genuine conversation here. So this was raw and unbridled, which you could probably tell by the exorbitant use of ums in the answers. That said, there is no time like the present to take up your space. And as someone that has absolutely felt some of the pushback that you're feeling right now, that has had those moments where my action didn't go the way I wanted it to, where my elders didn't understand where I was coming from, where I've seen the ugly things said about me online. None of that matters when you're impacting a greater good. And I think more so than any other demographic, we probably understand the most that all of this and all of the issues that we care about, that we've brought forward today, the things that we wanted to talk about, that you talked about with me, were very much rooted in caring for a perfect stranger in the same way that you would your best friend. It's that easy. It's that simple, and that's the heart of what we're doing. So I want to encourage you to keep loving and to keep fighting, and I cannot wait to see the movements you move.
Awesome. Well, thank you, everyone.
Night, guys.